Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're going to begin our webinar in just a few moments. We have folks we want to make sure can get into the room. Cameron is going to launch our poll. Tell us where you're coming from. What's your occupation? Are you a victim advocate? Do you do APS work? Do you work in a systems-based advocacy program or community-based program? Are you law enforcement? Do you work in financial services? Are you a banker or a broker? Do we have any legal professionals, attorneys, court professionals? So tell us where you're coming from. If your occupation isn't listed, go ahead and put that in the chat, and we welcome everybody today. We will begin in just a moment, just to give folks a few more minutes. Thanks, everyone. Looks like we're getting some good answers in our poll. So if you are a victim service professional, you work for a domestic violence program, an elder abuse program, you're considered a victim service professional. We've got legal professionals. If you work in the court, if you are an attorney, if you are a, what's the word I'm looking for? CASA, you can fill out our legal professionals. Feel free to click on that poll and let us know where you're coming from. Got some elder fraud hotline folks, welcome. Give folks about 1 or 2 more minutes. Cameron, can you see the results of our poll?
Yep, we can see them.
Perfect. Can you let us know what our answers are? You can go ahead and stop the poll. Perfect, thank you. So we've got 71% of you all in victim services. We've got financial services, legal professionals, a couple of law enforcement folks. Welcome, welcome. Well, we are delighted to have you all here today. We're going to go over some housekeeping notes just so that everybody's on the same page. So first, welcome. My name is Rachel Gibson, and I am one of our center directors, and I am the Center Director for the Center for Victim Service Professionals. Today, our webinar is being recorded. So in the next couple of weeks, you all will receive the recording. You will receive our Taking Action Guide link and a link for our evaluation. So please make sure you fill out our evaluation. We'll also be able to take question and answers in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. Please don't put those questions in the chat, because the chat is really where we're going to have folks introduce themselves, let us know a little bit about themselves, but we're going to lose those questions. So if you could put those questions in the Q&A box, that would be great. Trying to think of any other, we also have live transcription. So if you need that, you can click on that at the bottom of your screen, and you will have that option as well. We're delighted to have you all here today. This is our first joint webinar with our partners at the FINRA Investors Education Foundation this year. So welcome, everyone. It looks like we just hit over 500 attendees, so I'm delighted, and I will begin our webinar. Rob, you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks, Rachel. I'm Rob Massio. I'm a director with the FINRA Investor Education Foundation. And I'll talk to you all a little bit about who FINRA is for those that might not know, and who the FINRA Foundation is. So just by way of background, FINRA stands for the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. We are a not-for-profit regulator. We were authorized and put in place by Congress, but we're not a government agency. We are, however, overseen by the Securities and Exchange Commission, a government agency, to ensure that we're doing the job that we were put in place to do, which is to help regulate the brokerage industry, regulate brokerage firms and individuals that work for those brokerage firms. And overall, FINRA's mission is investor protection and market integrity, which we go about through a whole a variety of different functions, whether it's market surveillance of trading that's going on different exchanges, or examining brokerage firms, investigating instances of potential abuse in the financial markets. That all happens through FINRA. Now, the FINRA Foundation is a wholly owned subsidiary of FINRA, and the focus of the foundation is to help focus really on building financial capabilities for all Americans. And we do that through a variety of different programs. My area within the foundation is focusing on our investor protection campaign to help protect consumers, largely from financial fraud and financial exploitation. We go about helping build the financial capability for Americans through various different research projects that focus on financial capability, that might focus on financial fraud, cognitive type impairments that could impact individuals. We do a lot of really great research with the foundation. And we also conduct outreach to victim service providers, to advocates, to investors, to whoever it may be that can benefit from our information.
Wonderful, thanks, Rob. And we had a few other questions in our Q&A. We unfortunately aren't able to provide certificates today. We are creeping up to almost 600 attendees, so that we don't have that ability, but we also will share any subsequent materials that we have post-webinar, including the recording. And as I said earlier, my name is Rachel Gibson, and I'm one of our center directors here at the National Center for Victims of Crime. We were founded over 35 years ago after our founder's mother, Sunny Von Bulow, was murdered. And it was after her children went through this experience with the criminal justice system that they felt like they needed a place where advocates and professionals who work with victims can receive help and support as they help victims. And so our center was born. And in our particular center, the Center for Victim Service Professionals, we work to provide training, technical assistance, resource, and support for service providers. And you're going to hear me use that word service provider or advocate a lot today. But anyone who helps a victim is an advocate in my book. So if you are a banker, a broker, if you're law enforcement, you're advocating, you're working on behalf of victims. Even if you don't see that connection, you still come in contact with victims. And so we provide you all with resources, support, technical assistance, and training. We also have our Center for Victim and Survivor Services, and that is our center that does direct services. So we operate a 9-to-5 helpline for national victims of crime. So we know that many victims of crime come with many intersections, and one type of crime hotline is not going to meet all of their needs. And so our National Victim Connect hotline provides services through that, as well as our DC Victim Hotline, which is a 24/7 hotline that provides services to victims of crime, all types of victims of crime, whenever they've been a victim of crime. And both of our hotlines do that, where they serve, doesn't matter if you were a victim today or 10 years ago, we still will provide you with services. So what to expect? As we begin this conversation today, here's what we're going to cover. What's the scope of the problem? We have to know what the problem is in order to understand how we help victims come to some solutions. Many of us outside of financial services, myself included, think about this and we get a little icky. We say, "Oh, money, that's scary. I don't know what to do." But as service providers and those who work with victims, we have to be comfortable having these difficult conversations, especially when we talk about the ways in which victims of financial fraud and exploitation and abuse experience this sort of crime. And many of the victims you work with are going to feel nervous themselves and may not even know what's going on. And so our job isn't necessarily to have all the answers, but at the very least, be able to have options and solutions and be able to connect them with the right people. We'll also talk about who's at risk. So while anyone can be a victim of financial fraud or exploitation or financial abuse, we know that there are target populations, and we're going to talk about those target populations a little bit later. And then what is fraud? If I don't know what it is, I can't be on the lookout for it. And so we're going to talk about what fraud is and what are some of those scams and risks out there. And then lastly, we're going to cover what our role is as victim service providers or as advocates. And again, advocate doesn't just mean someone who does victim service work, it means anyone who is going to help a victim along their journey. We'll talk about some strategies, some safety planning solutions, as well as figuring out how we can help victims who may want to report, and also respecting the fact that some victims may not choose to do so. Lastly, and then our last two, we'll talk about recovery and prevention. We know that sometimes recovery may be hard for victims to get, but what are their options? What are some ways in which they can get recourse, as well as what are some preventative measures? In our work, we talk about prevention and intervention strategies. So what are some prevention strategies that victims and survivors can take, as well as resources? We have to work together. We have to work in partnership. And so who are your local financial service folks doing this work? Who are your local brokers? Who are your financial investors who can help you all work through some of this stuff with victims to help them figure out what's going on?
All right, so let's just dive right in. Let's talk about the scope of the problem, prevalence and impact. So based on the Federal Trade Commission report from 2020, it was estimated that there was about 2.2 million fraud complaints that were reported to the FTC. 34% of those indicated that they had lost money, and the total that was estimated is $3.3 billion. Now, this number is a number that's difficult to pinpoint the exact number of dollar amounts that has been defrauded from individuals. And it's based on what agency is being reported to, how the information is being correlated, and what is being reported versus what is not being reported. Now, it's estimated that 1 out of 18 cognitively intact older adults are scammed each year. So again, this is an estimate. 1 in 18 is estimated to be scammed each year. Now, this again is the information that we know. This is based off of reports that have been made. What we don't know is what's lying underneath the surface. So we have the typical iceberg slide that you often have in presentations. Well, this one's talking about what really is lying underneath the surface. What is the number of unreported complaints, and how can we increase those individuals' comfort in coming forward and reporting complaints? We also know that Americans receive approximately 50 billion robocalls per year. And it's estimated that about half of those are fraudulent. And I don't know about you all, but I have seen myself, I'm receiving a constant influx of scam related calls. And whether or not that's been heightened due to our current COVID environment or whatnot, but those robocalls, they continue to come, they continue to come.
Rob, we did have a question on this slide. Does this include liquid assets or does it include real property as well?
So this is going to be reported to based on however individuals reported it to the Federal Trade Commission. So if they ended up liquidating assets in order to have money go to a scam or something along those lines, but it's going to be based off of the dollar amount that was reported to the Federal Trade Commission.
Great, thanks.
Now, often we talk about that dollar amount. That's often a focus when we're talking to individuals, when we're collecting information from individuals, whenever we're having conferences, we're always talking about what is the financial impact. And it is an important aspect. But another area that is equally important is that non-financial impact. So nearly 2/3 of victims have reported experiencing at least one serious non-financial cost of fraud. And again, this is going to be to a serious extent. 50% had indicated that they were dealing with severe stress. 44% indicated anxiety that they were struggling with. And again, this is to a severe level. 38% had expressed difficulty in sleeping, and 35% indicated that they were dealing with depression. And again, this is to a severe extent. So it's important to keep that in mind as we are interacting with victims and survivors, that while the financial component is a component that's important, that non-financial cost is also so important, and to be aware of that as you're interacting with individuals that are victims or survivors.
Thanks, Rob. So first, we're going to talk about who's at risk. What does risk look like? As many of us know who do this work, risk is going to look different for each victim, but we all, in our heads have a stereotypical idea of who we think a victim is. And so let's throw that idea out because, again, anyone can be at risk for these sorts of crimes. Many schemes and scams are crafted really well. They prey on people's vulnerabilities, and especially in today's time of social distancing and people's losing jobs and the economy the way it is, it's preying on isolation, lack of community, and financial stress. We are seeing more people, especially as the pandemic still moves on, becoming victimized by scams such as romance scams, lottery, fake scholarships, and more. We have to understand how trauma, lack of resources, changes in society all affect victims. Fraudsters don't discriminate. They can target anyone, but we do have information that there are specific scam types and who's most likely to be impacted. And like I said, while anyone can be a victim, we do have to understand that there are going to be special populations that are targeted, and we need to understand why they are targeted. So by profile, everyone, like I said, has an idea of what a victim or of a scam looks like, but research tells us something different. Again, people of all backgrounds can experience fraud regardless of income, age, language, or ability status. But there are some scams and frauds that target certain demographics of people. So the lottery scams tend to go after single older females with education and income, lower education and income. These are your scams that come in by emails or calls saying that you must give a certain amount of money in order to claim your winnings. You've won the lottery in Nigeria, and now you have to give $10,000 in order to get your $5,000, those sorts of things. Then we have our mass marketing. This can affect any age group, including young adults. I actually was just reading an article not too long ago that said young adults are now falling prey to these scams at higher rates than we thought before. This fraud scheme uses one or more mass communication marketing methods, such as the internet, telephone, mail, or in-person meetings, to fraudulently solicit or transact with numerous prospective victims, or to transfer fraud proceeds to financial institutions. And again, these sorts of marketing can be broken up into a couple of categories: schemes that defraud a lot of victims out of small amount of money, say a couple of $100s, or schemes that defraud less victims out of a larger amount of money, so such as thousands or millions of dollars per victim. And then we have our investment scams, and these tend to be directed towards men near retirement or in retirement. Financial literacy is usually a little higher, their income is higher, education is higher. They tend to be self-reliant. These are kind of like your Ponzi schemes, pyramid schemes, market manipulation fraud. I think of these, I call these as the Bernie Madoff schemes. And oftentimes you see these happening to folks with, and we'll talk a little bit about this, through affinity groups or trusted advisors, those sorts of things. So let's talk about our high target population. First, older adults. They are a higher targeted population, but Rob will talk a little bit later about this, but they may be targeted because scammers assume that they have elements that make them more susceptible to scamming tactics. Seniors are often targeted because they tend to be trusting and polite. They usually have financial savings, own a home, have good credit, all of which make them attractive to scammers. But they also, the scammers, are hoping that due to their cognitive health issues, they may be having some financial fragility, they may be isolated, that they can prey on these type of victims. In truth, we know that older adults make up a third of fraud victims, but we also know that they are becoming more highly targeted, not necessarily at an increased risk for becoming a victim once targeted. With the older adult population growing and older adults racking up more than $3 billion in losses annually, elder fraud is likely to become and will be a growing issue. For intimate partner violence, domestic violence is about the abuser's power and control. While people often think about emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, Financial abuse is often cited by survivors as the primary reason why they stay or return to an abuser. In fact, the National Network to End Domestic Violence did a survey, and 99% of folks they spoke with said they cannot leave or will not leave due to the financial abuse that they are experiencing. However, 78% of Americans recognize that financial abuse is a form of domestic violence, but it's often difficult to kind of pinpoint what that is. It's important for us to think about it like this. If I'm a victim who's experiencing physical or emotional abuse, and also discover that my identity has been stolen, I've been coerced into investing into get rich quick schemes, or even become a victim of a romance scam and lost all of my money, my ability to leave the relationship goes down. So this is this is a very much intersectional issue. It's also important to note that for many intimate partner violence victims, the strategies that most of us would give for folks experiencing financial abuse may not be the same. And this is also, I think, can be comparative to older adults as well, because most often than not, their abuser is a caregiver, someone who knows them, a family member. And so when we tell people to no longer talk to the perpetrator, get rid of the device, stop using that account, that's not always safe for victims of intimate partner violence or domestic violence. And so we have to make sure that our safety planning strategies are in line with what that person is experiencing, taking into consideration that the perpetrator of the crime may be someone who has intimate access to them. And then previous victimization. Previous victims are more likely to be new or repeat victims. But as we think about this, many scams lead to ID theft or their information is often sold online. There are some complex frauds out there that are preparing victims for the net fraud while still scamming them. This leads to multiple victimization. Fraud criminals relentlessly target or retarget the most vulnerable victims. Often what will happen is they will sell their information to what's called a sucker list to other perpetrators. For us as service providers, we have to take into consideration the kind of emotional toll that this will have on victims. It's difficult for us to understand how someone can repeatedly give money to con artists, but for some victims, responding to fraudulent offers or investments is a repetitive form of behavior, much like an addiction. Also, when we think about older adults, when we talked about isolation, this is, again, something to consider, because if that person is isolated, this may be the only time that they are talking with someone during the week and someone shows that they care. And so it's important for us to help them break the cycle of this victimization. So now that we have an understanding of the target populations, let's spend some time talking about how fraud actually occurs and what some of the risks and tactics are. Perpetrators of this type of crime can range from the most intimate of people, like I said, a caregiver, family member, partner, or to a stranger far away. Perpetrators are looking for people who may be vulnerable, isolated, again, looking for someone who they feel is an easy target. For a family member, especially someone who's in a position of control over that family member's care, this is really important to think about. Think of someone who's power of attorney and possibly a caretaker or a child or partner. Members or leaders of an affinity group. These are usually your gatekeepers to the community. Think pastors, coaches, civic club leaders, VFW comrades. Their work is to utilize the common interests to build trust to effectively operate the investment fraud against the person. And then trusted advisors, again, accountants, attorneys, investment professionals. People think of these people as, again, having some sort of power. When your investment banker or someone tells you that this is a good deal, you're going to believe them because they have an authority. They speak with authority. And so they often will utilize this to prey on victims. The fraudster's ability to foster trust makes these schemes so successful.
Right. Thank you, Rachel. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a study that that FINRA Foundation did with Stanford Center on Longevity. But before I get into that, I know there was a couple questions, just wanted to address those. One was relating to victim profiles on romance scams. We've heard, as well as the individual who commented here, we've heard romance scams continue to be on the rise. I know the FBI has put out information regarding that, and we continue to hear stories of just an influx of romance-related scams. And a lot of that could be due to the isolation that a lot of individuals have been in due to the pandemic and social isolation. But a specific profile on romance scams, I don't have a specific example, but anecdotally, from what I'm aware of, it's often going to be individuals who are looking to kind of fulfill that emotional need, and it can be men, it can be women. We are working on another one of our partners is the Cybercrime Support Network, and we've actually launched a peer support network for romance scam survivors. And a lot of the individuals that have been going through that program, a lot of them are women. There are men that have been involved in that program, but we are hearing that a lot of women have been in that. And if anybody is looking for that resource on how to refer somebody to the Cybercrime Support Network's romance scam peer support program, I'm happy to put that link out for you all a little bit later. Go back one, Rachel. There we go. So evaluating emotions. I just want to talk quickly about the study that the FINRA Foundation did with the Stanford Center on Longevity. And what we did is we tried to understand the role that emotions played in decision-making. And we did this through a series of essentially a gaming study. And we were given people misleading advertisements, purposely misleading, clearly misleading advertisements, and wanted to gauge an individual's willingness to ask additional questions or to engage in that fraudulent advertisement, and then take that and see whether emotions played a role in their willingness to engage or not. And one of the things that we found was that for older individuals, whether they were in a heightened state of emotion, a positive or a negative heightened state of emotion, they were likely to engage, more likely to engage than a younger subset. So it just goes to show that emotions, they really are powerful. And whether it is a positive or a negative type of emotion, whether it's excited or fearful, angry, afraid, being in that heightened state of emotion can impact an individual's decision-making process. Moving on to the next slide, Rachel. So what are some of the tactics that fraudsters might use? And these are tactics that are used by a lot of individuals, not just fraudsters. So some of these you might even be able to pinpoint thinking back to some marketing tactics that companies use. And just because these tactics exist doesn't mean something's fraudulent, but they work in marketing, they work in trying to scam individuals. So some of those tactics, the first one is called phantom riches. And this is dangling that prospect of wealth in front of somebody, kind of painting that picture of what that person's life would be like if they were to have a windfall of money, using words like risk-free or guaranteed, high returns. Those are some of the tactics that are used in phantom riches. Social consensus, that's that play where everybody else is doing it, so maybe you should too. There's a fast food restaurant that says on their sign, billions served. Well, that's a social consensus play. That's showing that billions of people have eaten at this restaurant and have enjoyed their burgers, so maybe you should too. Source credibility is one where an individual is trying to portray themselves as credible. And this can be done through a variety of different ways. It can be accreditations, it can be degrees, it could be a title by saying I'm a senior vice president in XYZ company. That's a way that individuals are trying to show their credibility. And credibility can be a fast track to trust, but it's important to remember that credibility can easily be faked. Reciprocity, this is something you see often with those free lunch type of offers, where an individual offers to, you come to my seminar, I'll give you a free lunch. And then the hope is by paying for their $15 lunch or whatever it may be, the individual is then going to be willing or more likely to give their money over to this individual to manage, to invest, to do whatever it is. Not to say that all free lunches are bad. It's just something to be aware of if individuals do get those offers for free lunches. And then scarcity. This is that play where you see it on infomercials where the clock is ticking down, the number of there's only 6 more green Tupperwares available for you to purchase. That's scarcity. That's using that emotion to try and get an individual to act quickly because they're afraid they're going to miss out on that opportunity. Next slide, Rachel. I want to talk about another one of the studies that the FINRA Foundation did. This was, again, with Stanford Center on Longevity and the Better Business Bureau. And what we did is we focused on reports that were made to the Better Business Bureau's Scam Tracker. And if you're not familiar with Scam Tracker, it's a really neat database that anybody can take a look at, and you can see what type of scams have been reported in certain areas. It's a great tool. If anybody hasn't seen it, I'd encourage you to check it out. But what we did is we looked at reports that were made to the Better Business Bureau Scam Tracker, and we were trying to understand what separated victims from non-victims. So the people that were reporting to Better Business Bureau, they fell in a couple of different categories, and not all of them were victims. Some of them just simply reported because they saw something that was a little odd or something that seemed suspicious or they thought was fraudulent. And they said, you know what, I'm just going to report it. I'm not going to go any further, but I'm going to report it to kind of do all I can to help society. So looking at that full picture, there were 47% of the individuals that reported, they did not engage. So they were in that bucket that they were reporting for the good of the society. 30% of the individuals that we looked at that reported, they engaged. So they responded to the email, they answered the phone, they asked follow-up questions, they engaged in some manner, but they were not victimized. And then the last subset at 23%, those are individuals who engaged and were in turn victimized. So we wanted to understand what kind of separates those individuals from those 3 categories. Rachel, next slide. So one of the areas that we identified was the role of persuasion. So victims who engaged and were victimized were much more likely to agree with some of these statements. They thought the person on the other end of the phone or on the email seemed official. That's a play on source credibility that I talked about earlier. Individuals felt that they were under time pressure. Again, scarcity. I had to act now or I'd miss out on my opportunity. From the reciprocity tactic, people thought that the person was nice, thought it was a nice individual. So, I should maybe trust them, or I should continue to have this conversation with them because they seemed nice. And then individuals, they were worried about missing out on an opportunity. And again, that's that scarcity play. We also saw among the individuals that engaged that social isolation played a role in engagement. And this kind of goes back to that question about the victim profile for romance scam victims or survivors. Among those who engaged, there was a social isolation play. And some of the instances of social isolation were social isolation in the sense that we think about, where they had nobody to talk to. But in other instances, it was individuals that had people that they could talk to, but they chose not to. So in a sense, they put themselves in a state of social isolation. So social isolation is a really important factor when it comes to individuals engaging in potentially fraudulent scams. Now, I know everybody, we're all hopeful that that we're sliding out of the COVID pandemic, where social isolation is becoming less and less, happening less and less in communities. People are out and about. So some of this is a little bit dated, but it's still important to keep in mind, because we all know that reports and complaints, they often can lag behind what's occurring. So we could continue to see some of these financial frauds that are popping up or being reported. But COVID did increase social isolation, which put a lot of people at potential risk. There's also the factor of financial insecurity, which played a role, again, from our study with the Better Business Bureau. Individuals that were financially insecure, so say they didn't have the ability to come up with $2,000 to meet that emergency that came about. those individuals were more likely to engage and be victimized. And then uncertainty and fear play a role as well, again, playing on those emotions. Continuing with this study, so we continue to look at it, we continue to try and evaluate why individuals make certain decisions. And one of the areas that came out of this study was the way the mental frames that individuals utilize when faced with the decision-making process. And these mental frames are developed over time based on experiences that people have had over life. And we found that these 4 mental frames, so compliance, intelligence, opportunity, and order, often could be at play when an individual potentially engaged in what could have been a fraudulent opportunity. So looking at compliance, whether an individual was compliant in nature and believed it was their duty to comply, or saw compliance as something that's optional. So the speed limit says 65. I'm okay if I go 73. No one's going to pull me over for going, 7 over the speed limit, whatever it may be. Intelligence, whether people looked at a situation from, if I ask questions, am I going to appear unintelligent, or asking questions makes me seem intelligent. Opportunity, whether they look at opportunities that individuals have had and say, that's luck. That person got there because of luck, or was it through hard work or something along those lines. And then order, good people are rewarded and bad people are punished. People took that view. Were they more likely to engage and potentially be victimized, or were it the people that said that they have the ability to drive their own destiny? And on the next slide, you'll see exactly what we found out. The ones in red, those are the attitudes and beliefs that we found that often showed up in individuals that had engaged and were victimized. So on the compliance, believing compliance is a duty. From the intelligence aspect, thinking that by asking questions, they might appear unintelligent. Opportunity, the view that wealth is built on random opportunities or luck. And order, good people will be rewarded, bad people will be punished. People that had those specific views tended to be more likely to engage.
So what role does the advocate play here? And again, remember, everyone here is an advocate in this sense. We, know that as an advocate, we hold a level of power over victims. While we may not want to believe that, when a victim or survivor comes to us for services, we have access to those services. We are the gatekeeper to those services. And so we are in a position to either provide support or resources, or could be the deterrence for someone getting the help that they need. So our first job is to always start by believing. I know we say that a lot in our work, but especially around financial fraud and exploitation type crimes, it's very important for us to believe the victim, because we know that for many folks, especially when we think about our target populations, older adults and or folks, intimate partner violence victims, that they are often fearful or shameful in coming forward. Well, I should have known better. I should have known not to invest my money. I should have known not to give my money. And so they are more likely to not come forward. So when and if they do come forward, we have to really take it upon ourselves to believe them and then help them navigate what's going on. We also have to help victims feel empowered to make their own decisions. And their own decisions may not be the decisions we agree with, but we have to empower victims to take back that control and to really identify what the best option for them is going to be. And then, as always, whatever work we do, has to be done through a trauma-informed, strength-based lens. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means in the next couple of slides. And then lastly, as I said at the beginning, it's okay that we may not know the answer to victims' questions or concerns, but we can get survivors pointed in the right direction to help them figure out what their options are, as well as we're already building a network, a cadre of experts in different fields and different occupations to help identify who can help a victim as they're going through their process. So financial victimization can be traumatic for victims if it is unique and disruptive enough to make it difficult for victims to kind of reestablish that equilibrium. In times like now, finances are often stressful for many people, whether they're having to cope with losing their job during the pandemic, caring for children or family members, making sure they have a sustainable income for an unpredictable future. There's a lot of financial stress and strain on everyone. When you add on the trauma of experiencing financial fraud and abuse, knowing you may have saved up your money for years for retirement and you've now invested it in something that has gone belly up, that can cause someone to have a trauma response. Individuals who have experienced financial fraud can have the same emotional needs as individuals who have experienced violent crime. Because we don't want to make assumptions about the impacts of these crimes, a trauma-informed approach is always best. For those of you who are from the victim services field, I break it down as being trauma-informed quite simply means we recognize the presence of trauma symptoms, which may be past, present, what someone may have experienced, their lived experience, and the things they carry with them, and acknowledging that this may play a role in how someone adjusts or copes with what is happening in their life. So think about it about safety. Again, safety and security is going to mean different things for different victims. Two people who've experienced the same sort of trauma or fraud or victimization may have different safety needs. Staff and clients need to feel physically and psychologically safe. This also means financial safety and making sure that there's a preventative plan in place for victims to avoid re-victimizations. Victims are the best folks to tell us what feels safe for them. They're the experts. It's important for us to consider also when we talk about safety, that safety may have to play a role in if that person's perpetrator is, again, an intimate partner, a caregiver, a trusted community advisor, if they have a relationship with that person. So as we work to safety plan, our financial safety plan may look a little different when we have to take that into context. When we think about trust and transparency is critical always, but for individuals who have been scammed, they need to be able to understand clearly what their next steps are going to be. They need to know what their options are so that they can feel confident. Many aren't going to feel confident in what the next steps are going to be because they've already been burned. They've already have been deceived. And so we have to help them figure out how to spot or recognize when deceit or deception is occurring. They have been lied to and weren't able to see it. And so again, if someone's coming to us and they ask us for help in services, we're going to be honest with them and tell them that there may not be recovery. There may not be, they may not be able to get a criminal case, but maybe they can pursue a civil case. So we're going to tell them what their options are and be honest about the limitations of our services. But I think trust and transparency also leads to empowerment. And I like to think about it as empowerment means a voice and a choice. This principle recognizes that every person's experience is unique and requires an individualized approach. We're going to build on what the individual has to offer rather than responding to what they may perceive or what society may perceive as a deficit. It recognizes that individuals, again, are experts in their own lives, even though this sort of thing happened, that they are not at fault for what happened. This is one of those kind of talking points we talk about all the time in our work, that the victim should never be blamed for what has happened to them. And as service providers, we may have a goal to help victims get to a certain point, but victims have to choose what that point is. Survivors have to choose what that point is. And so if they're going to make a choice, they have to be informed. They have to have all of the right information. And we can do this by sharing our knowledge and then collaboratively working with the client, with the person to think through what their options are. And as we think about collaboration, thinking about it in terms of collaboration and mutuality. Healing happens in relationships, and meaningful sharing of power and decision-making is especially going to be important when we talk about working with victims. They may not feel like they can trust themselves, so doing so will help them in their recovery. And then cultural, historical, and gender issues, especially when we think about finances and the way in which certain cultures view money, view power, view wealth, view, all of these things. It is important for us to leave our stereotypes and biases at the door, making sure that we can approach victims and survivors in a way that helps them feel safe and supported. There are going to be factors like historical trauma, reactions to the system, cultural barriers, why people may not feel safe coming to you for help. In one of our slides, we talk about reporting is going to be important. But in many communities, communities of color, folks living with disabilities, immigrant communities, they may not feel safe reporting. They may feel like it jeopardizes their safety even more to report. And so we have to be mindful of that as we work with them to help them not only, feel safe in reporting, but help them find alternatives to that if they do choose so. So we have to realize the impact of trauma. Can fraud be traumatic? Yes. Our response needs to be, again, trauma informed, making sure that we know that this impact, losing thousands of dollars, losing your money, falling victim to someone who told you that they loved you and they wanted to be with you, and all you had to do was send me some money because I can afford to come visit you, but if you send this to me, we can be together. All of that is traumatic. Someone has preyed on someone's vulnerability, preyed on their heart. And so we have to respond that we have to respond in a way that honors the trauma that folks are living with. We have to also recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma. Trauma responses are going to show up in many different ways. Like I said before, two people can experience the same sort of thing, but also have very different trauma responses. And so for someone who may seem combative or aggressive or indifferent, that might be their trauma response. And so we have to learn not to take that personally, but recognize it for what it is. We have to respond by integrating knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, and practices. My colleagues and my friends and family know me well, and they know I like policy, I like procedure, I like rules. But when we're talking about folks who have experienced a traumatic event, when folks who have experienced financial fraud, we have to realize that our rules, our policies, our process have to be trauma informed and have to be able to have some fluidity that they can be adjusted based on the need. It's not to say we shouldn't have some rules, but it is to say that those responses, those rules, those policies have to be able to meet the needs of victims in a broader way. And then again, resist re-traumatization. We know that when victims get to us, they may have had to share their story 5, 6, 7 times. So it's helping them not to have to reshare that story in a traumatic way. It's making sure that if we're making referrals, that referral option is still open, that they don't get a closed door or a out of business sign, that they don't, we're not victim blaming. We're not saying, well, you should have known better. You should have not invested your money. And so we're working towards making sure that they are not re-traumatized. So a recovery plan, someone put this in here earlier about credit recovery, and there's some great resources out there to help people kind of recover their credit, rebuild their credit. But in most cases, recovery takes work and it's going to take a long time. And this kind of goes back to our conversation around transparency. It's one of those things where the fraud, the money leaves quickly, but the recovery takes months, years, and may not even happen at all. So it's important for us to make sure that victims understand that recovery takes work, and that they may not actually hear back from providers or from folks that they report to. For example, to Rob's point, for some reason, my Social Security is always going to get shut down. My Social Security number, every week I get the same call, and so every week I go onto the FTC website and make that report. I don't get a follow-up, don't get a call back, but I know that I'm making that report. And by making that report, I'm helping the FTC keep track of what these scammers are doing. And so it's important for us to work with victims that we tell them that they may not hear back from companies, but that reporting does still matter if it is safe for them to do so. And like I said earlier, reporting doesn't necessarily mean that I'm reporting to law enforcement, I could be reporting to the FTC. I could be reporting to the social media or the dating app where the romance scam is happening. And so there are alternative reporting options that may feel safer for victims, especially for victims who, again, may be connected to their perpetrator. And then reframing that recovery. Again, recovery can look like a lot of things for a lot of people. And so it's helping them understand that there are other options out there and that recovery could also be about health. So it's not just about finances, but it's also about the victim facing any emotional trauma caused by the crime and potentially seeking services that may be helpful for them, like counseling services or talking with an advocate, talking with someone who can help them process this. Like I said earlier, we can't do this work without a collaborative approach. Multidisciplinary teams and financial assistance support teams are going to be important for us to make sure that we're connecting with these folks before we actually need them. Do you know who your local MDT is? Is your organization on this multidisciplinary or financial assistance support team? If not, see if you can get on there. If there is one in your community, don't feel like you have to make a new one. Most communities have some sort of version of this. So seek these people out. They are willing to help. They're willing to have conversations, and they want to be a part of this process for victims. Victim shaming and blaming. Financial abuse and fraud and exploitation comes with a lot of shaming and blaming. Here's a post that people wrote about someone who experienced financial fraud. And even if, I tell people all the time, even if we don't know the person who is sharing this, we know someone in our life who has or will experience this. And if they see that we're posting this, that we're sharing it, that we're blaming them and saying they're dumb and stupid, they're going to remember that. And that's going to cause people not to report. So it's one of those things that I always say that bystander intervention is important. When we see things like that happening, call it out. And then recovery. Safety planning is going to be important here because we have to make sure that victims and survivors understand what their options are and that their safety plan includes a financial component. Planning is going to be physical as well as financial, as well as including technology. It's going to be a strategy that's written down by the victim to help them identify what they should do in case of they need to leave a situation, in case the violence escalates, in case their accounts get locked down, in case any of these things happen. And there are a ton of really great resources out there that we can connect you all to as well. Thinking about safety planning strategies as well, we can help victims by helping them recognize when something is a fraud, when something may seem a scam. I always tell victims and survivors I work with, ask more questions, keep asking questions, and move slowly. If someone tells you that this deal is too good, is if you don't sign up for it in the next 5 minutes, you're going to lose it, then you're just going to lose it because that's too good to be true. Vet that person, Google that person, see if there's a real business license out there about that person. Resource referral, making sure we refer to the appropriate resource. Mental health, remembering that this is a trauma, this is a traumatic event that someone's experiencing. Our first option shouldn't be to say, you need to see a mental health professional, but it is to say that this could be a traumatic event and you should talk to someone who can help you process. And then thinking through all the different reporting strategies. We didn't get to talk about every type of fraud here today, but here we have our checklist. I know folks asked about the materials in the, will you get the follow-up material? We will make sure you have these checklists as well as our taking action guide for advocates in the follow-up email, so stay tuned for that. And then thinking about action plans. Discontinue all engagement with the perpetrator. And I think I'm going to adjust this slide and put a little star at the top that says, if you are safe to do so. Again, if you are a caregiver or if the abuser is a caregiver, partner, this may not be safest for them. But if it is a stranger or they're able to do that, that's going to be important because you don't want the victim to keep giving their information and engaging with that perpetrator so that person can keep preying on their feelings and on their vulnerabilities. Create a case file document. Especially in this kind of technology world we live in, documenting is going to be important because people can delete or get rid of. We want to make sure that if a survivor or victim wants to report, that they can, and so that they have that case file with all the important information that's relevant to their crime. Know your rights. Most of the time, people who are fraudsters are banking on the fact that people don't know their rights. So know what you're obligated to, know what your options are, and make sure that you know that you have rights, and make sure that victims know that they have rights. And then my favorite one is to put them on blast. Report the suspected fraud widely. Put it on Google. Google it. I always, whenever I get a scam number, I always look it up to see if other people have reported it. Tell your friends and family. Ask around. Again, if they're a trusted advisor in the community, ask them what they've heard about the person. Look them up. See what's being said about them. And then thinking about, again, if we're not sure, not to invest in it.
Right. So there was one question I saw that relates to what you just mentioned, Rachel. Do state AG consumer reports collaborate with the FTC reports, or should victims be reporting to both state and federal agencies? So I can tell you that there is a lot of collaboration that is going on, whether it's through state and federal agencies such as FINRA and other, whether it's a state or a federal agency. We do make a lot of referrals to various agencies when we come across financial frauds that are outside of our jurisdiction. There is a lot of communication going on. That being said, there is no harm in reporting it to everybody, right? The more you report, the more, it's kind of that squeaky wheel thought, right? So the more you report, the more that people are going to look at it, or they might look at it from a different angle. So in my opinion, I see no harm in reporting it to various different agencies. All right. So now we're going to talk a little bit about prevention and intervention. What can we do? We've learned a lot of really interesting information about financial fraud, and what can we do to help prevent it or help stop this issue before it continues to grow. So next slide, Rachel. I'm going to go back a little bit to that Better Business Bureau study that I mentioned a few times. We got so much great information out of it. And for anybody that's interested, on our website, finrafoundation.org, you can access all of the different research projects that we've engaged in, including this one, the Exposed to Scam study with the Better Business Bureau. But one of the things that we found was knowledge truly is power. And I know we've probably heard this saying before, knowledge is power. Well, this is true as well when it comes to financial fraud and when it comes to individuals engaging in being victimized. The more that individuals know about how scams work, how they operate, what type of scams are out there, the less likely they are to engage. In fact, we found that the individuals are 80% less likely to engage simply by knowing about the scams that are out there, by knowing how they operate. And then they're 40% less likely to lose money or share personal financial information. So it really just goes to show that role of education and discussing with individuals about the scams that are out there can really play such a significant role in keeping them in that non-victimized category, keeping individuals in that category. We did another really interesting research project with AARP, where we were trying to focus on and look at disrupting the cycle when it comes to chronic fraud victimization. And what we found that there were often 4 different areas where an individual or an advocate or anybody who's trying to disrupt that cycle can play a role. First off, the situational factors. That's going to be an area where something like social isolation. So if an individual is in an isolated state, that's a situational factor that could cause them to engage in some sort of a scam. So what can we do to disrupt that? If we are working with people on a daily basis, we're advocating for them, picking up the phone, having that conversation could be enough to move them out of that feeling of loneliness. Trigger, that's going to be kind of the catalyst that elicits some kind of a response. It could be the urgent phone call. It could be that email that says that your computer's infected. Some sort of event that's triggering the potential engagement in the fraud. Motivation, that really focuses more on the core values of an individual. So are they looking to fulfill, so in a romance scam individual, they're looking to kind of fulfill that need to be loved or wanted. You could see that in a lot of different types of frauds as well. So what's the underlying motivation, and how can we play a role in trying to disrupt that aspect? And then the ability, that's an individual's ability to access those funds. Is there some sort of an intervention that can happen to slow down the ability to access those funds? And sometimes ability can be something as simple as cognitive impairment that's causing individuals to continue down this cycle of chronic fraud. But if anybody's interested in that study, it's also available on our FINRA Foundation website.
Great, thanks, Rob. So here are some of our resources that we have. We have our Taking Action Guide, and a lot of you asked for more resources, more contacts. That Taking Action Guide is going to have a lot of really good information in there. So we'll make sure you have that as well. So feel free to utilize that. We have our Victim Connect Resource Center, which is our helpline for all victims of crime that includes financial fraud, exploitation, abuse. And this is open Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 7:30. And we have a call, text, chat, or website that you can get assistance to.
And of course, FINRA has a whole slew of resources as well. Just quickly highlight some of these. I know we're tight on time, so I'm trying to move fast here. FINRA.org, that's our FINRA website. So FINRAFoundation.org and FINRA.org, two separate websites. One of the resources I want to highlight is our Securities Helpline for Seniors. It's a toll-free number that anybody can call and speak to a knowledgeable staff member within FINRA to help answer questions, direct individuals to resources, take information that could be some sort of a complaint within the securities industry, and kickstart an investigation further into those concerns and allegations. So a really great number to write down. If you're advocating on behalf of an individual, you're more than welcome to reach out. The helpline receives calls from Adult Protective Services, from financial institutions, from individuals that are caretakers, from individuals themselves. So anybody can really reach out and leverage that as a resource. We also have a lot of other investor-focused resources. We have investor insight articles that talk about kind of trends and things that we're seeing within the financial landscape. We have a Fighting Fraud 101 brochure that provides some additional information and context on financial fraud and how we can help fight that. So I would encourage you all, if you haven't previously, to check out our website. And another great tool that we have is our external facing broker check. Now, broker check is a system that anybody can access, and you can use this to do that due diligence, that research process. If you're concerned about a securities professional who's holding themselves out, trying to sell securities or investments, you can use broker check to see whether that individual is in fact licensed, whether they are licensed to be able to sell securities. You can see if they've had any disciplinary history. You can see how long they've been in the industry, what type of complaints, if any, that they've received. You can also look to see if a brokerage firm is registered as well. So you can get individual information, you can get firm level information, all really great when you're doing that research. This also links to the Securities and Exchange Commission's similar type of database that focuses on investment advisors. There's a difference between a brokerage firm and an investment advisor firm. But if you were to type an individual in broker check who is an investment advisor, it'll automatically link you over there. So it's kind of a one-stop place to get that information. Just quickly, some other resources. Obviously, FINRA is not the only resource out there. The Federal Trade Commission, the Report Fraud portal, the Cybercrime Support Network. I put in the chat a link to the peer support program that I mentioned earlier. The CFPB can be a great resource, especially if you're dealing with credit or debt collection type of issues. National Elder Fraud Hotline, and of course, NCVC's portal.
And it looks like we've had a lot of great questions. So unfortunately, we're not able to get to them today. This was more of a high level overview of kind of what fraud looks like for many victims. But I know that some of you all have some really in-depth questions. I know folks are asking questions around credit recovery options and what that means, as well as are these resources available in Canada? And so what we are going to do, because we have a lot of questions and I want to make sure that you all get the answers you need, we're going to develop an FAQ. We're not going to attribute your name to them, but we're going to answer the questions as best we can, provide those resource lists so that you can have that. And then if there's any need for follow-up, you all can reach out to myself and Rob for more information. But one last question, Rob, that I think you can answer real quick. Is there a cost for FINRA services?
There is not a cost, no. So if anybody were to leverage the helpline, I also saw in there somebody asked the time zone. That's going to be an Eastern Standard Time. So the hours for the helpline, I believe they're 9 to 5. But they do have an answering machine. So if it's outside of those hours, they will give you a call back likely next day. But
Yep.
there is no cost for leveraging FINRA services, to using our resources. Some of our resources are even available in hard copy. We would be able to ship those to you free of charge.
Wonderful. Well, I know I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen because you're going to get this PowerPoint in the follow-up. But I know I had a good time today. Thank you all so much. We'll make sure what we're going to do is we're going to leave the chat open for just a few moments because some folks were asking for Rob and I's contact information. So Rob, can you type your email in the chat and I'll put mine in the chat. And then we'll make sure you all get that. I'm trying to type and talk at the same time, and I cannot do that. But thank you all so much. Again, you all asked some great questions. Rob, I think we have some more webinars we need to do on some really good topics. So we're going to compile everything. Remember, you're going to get the recording, a PDF of the PowerPoint, the FAQ with your questions, as well as an evaluation link. So be on the lookout for that, as well as we mentioned our Taking Action Guide with the checklist. You'll get that. So you're going to get a ton of wealth of information in the coming weeks. Be patient with us because it's going to take us a little while to compile all of this and answer all of your great questions. But on behalf of myself and Rob, thank you all so much for joining us. I enjoyed today. I hope you enjoyed today. And we wish you a good rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. And please feel free to reach out. Like Rachel said, more than happy to answer your questions offline at a later point in time too.
So we're going to leave the chat open for just a few more moments to make sure we've gotten everyone who wanted to get our email in there. And we'll follow up soon. All right. Thanks, Cameron.